The air was different here. It carried the scent of wet soil and wildflowers, drifting over rolling hills that stretched toward the horizon. Diep stood at the edge of the land, her fingers brushing against the tall grass, her heart strangely still. This place was far from the chaos of the city, and even farther from the shadows of her past. And yet, she felt as though someone had gently placed her here, as if the world had conspired to give her a second chance. For years, Diep had lived with pain she never spoke aloud. The loss of her parents, the loneliness of long nights, the feeling of being forgotten. There were scars no one could see, but ones she carried everywhere. She had built walls around herself, telling herself she didn't need anyone, that she could survive alone. But survival is not the same as living. And then came James. To most people, James was the picture of control, a sharp-suited CEO with the weight of a company on his shoulders. But to Diep, he was something else entirely. A man who had quietly sat by her hospital bed when she was sick, who had fed her warm rice when she was too weak to lift her spoon, who had spoken to her even when she couldn't answer. He never demanded her trust, he simply earned it, one quiet act at a time. It was James who had brought her here, to this stretch of green land tucked between the mountains and the town. "I thought you might like it," he had said, his voice calm but carrying something deeper, a hope she could almost touch. The land was more than just soil and trees. It was a promise. There would be a small house with white walls and a warm kitchen, a garden filled with guava and pomelo trees, and a pond where fish would ripple the surface on quiet afternoons. It would be a place to breathe, to heal, to build something new. In the days that followed, Diep began to work alongside the team James had hired. She planted seeds, learned the rhythm of the earth, and watched as sand and cement slowly shaped the skeleton of her future home. At night, she sat on the unfinished porch, her bare feet dangling as the crickets sang in the dark. For the first time in years, her thoughts were not trapped in the past, they were drifting toward tomorrow. Still, she couldn't ignore the question that lingered in her mind. Was James truly doing this for her, or was there another reason? She knew of the struggles his company had faced, the failed hydroelectric project, the betrayal from those he once trusted. Maybe this land was more than a gift, maybe it was also his escape. One evening, as the sky blushed with sunset, Diep found James standing alone by the pond. His reflection wavered in the water, his face unreadable. She walked up beside him, her voice soft. "Why are you really doing all this?" He turned to her, meeting her eyes without hesitation. "Because you need a place to heal, and because I need a reason to believe in something again. You gave me that reason." The words settled between them, heavier than the dusk. Diep realized then that they were not just building a house or a garden. They were building each other, holding one another up in the quiet work of starting over. Perhaps James had his own wounds, ones he never spoke of. Perhaps she was not the only one who had been saved. And as the first stars began to pierce the darkening sky, Diep felt the truth settle in her chest. This land, this life, this new beginning, none of it was an accident. James was behind her, and maybe, just maybe, that was exactly where he was meant to be. The days in the new land began to weave themselves into a rhythm, morning light spilling through the unfinished windows, the smell of freshly cut wood from the builders, the sound of laughter from the workers James had hired. Diep found herself waking earlier, eager to walk the garden path she was slowly shaping. She planted guava trees along the fence line, set up bamboo stakes for climbing beans, and dreamed of the day she would harvest vegetables with her own hands. James came whenever his work allowed, bringing with him both good news and burdens from the city. His company was still in a fragile state, the betrayal by John, the sudden loss of investors, and the whispers in the business world all weighed on him. Yet whenever he stepped onto the soil of this place, his shoulders seemed to loosen, his eyes to soften. But peace has a way of drawing storms. One afternoon, while James was away finalizing a deal in the city, an unfamiliar car pulled up to the edge of the property. A man stepped out, tall, confident, with a gaze that lingered on Diep a little too long. He introduced himself as Min, a CEO in his own right, sent to discuss a potential partnership with James on a new infrastructure project. But his eyes told a different story, curious, assessing, and perhaps interested. They spoke briefly, polite words wrapped around a tension Diep didn't fully understand. Min complimented the land, the garden, the view. Before leaving, he smiled faintly. "It suits you," he said, as if he knew her in some unspoken way. When James returned that evening, Diep mentioned the visit. The shift in his expression was small, but unmistakable. A flicker of caution, maybe even protectiveness. He asked careful questions, his tone calm, but his eyes seemed to be searching hers for something. In the weeks that followed, Min's name came up again, in James's meetings, in business circles, and even in the quiet rumors that reached this quiet valley. Diep began to notice how James grew more focused, more determined, as if the land and the house were no longer just a refuge, but also a shield. One night, the air was heavy with the scent of rain. Diep sat on the porch, watching the distant hills vanish into mist. James joined her, handing her a cup of warm tea. They sat in silence, until she asked, softly, "James, if the storms come here too, will we still be able to keep this place?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he took her hand, firm, steady, grounding. "We'll keep it," he said at last, his voice low but certain. "I didn't bring you here to lose you. Not to anyone. Not to anything." The rain began to fall, soft at first, then stronger, drumming against the roof. And as it washed over the new land, Diep realized something. She had stepped into a life that was both fragile and fierce, a life where love was not just given but fought for. Somewhere beyond the hills, forces were moving, business rivals, old grudges, and new desires, and she knew they would not stay hidden for long. But for now, she leaned into James's warmth, letting the sound of the rain remind her of this truth. Whatever was coming, they would face it together. The weeks that followed brought a strange tension to the air, the kind that could not be named, yet was felt in every conversation, every look. Diep continued her quiet work on the land, tending to the guava trees and coaxing rows of young vegetables from the soil. But she could feel the world beyond her fence growing closer. Min's visits became more frequent. Sometimes he came with a legitimate reason. Updates on the infrastructure project, proposals for joint ventures, but other times his presence felt less like business and more like observation. He spoke of life in the city, of the freedom he had once sought when he left the corporate world to play guitar on street corners. He told her he admired her resilience, how she had built a life from almost nothing, and though his words were respectful, there was an unspoken undertone, a quiet pull that made her uneasy. James noticed it too. His polite exchanges with Min carried a steel edge, a silent warning beneath the surface. But James was fighting battles on more than one front. Rumors of another sabotage attempt, whispers of John's shadow lurking somewhere in the background, reached him through his most trusted employees. The collapse of his last project had nearly destroyed him, and he could not afford another blow. One late afternoon, as the sky burned with the orange fire of sunset, James arrived earlier than usual. His clothes carried the faint scent of the city, but his expression was darker than the clouds gathering on the horizon. "Diep," he said, his voice measured but tense. "If something happens, If people try to drag me down again, I need you to remember this land is yours now. Whatever happens to me, don't let anyone take it away from you." Her heart clenched. "James, don't talk like that. We'll face it together, won't we?" He looked at her for a long moment, as if memorizing her face. Then he nodded, but the weight in his eyes remained. The next day, a letter arrived at the gate with no sender's name. Inside, in careful handwriting, it read, "You think you've found safety in the hills, but the past always finds you. Watch the ones who visit when the rain falls." The paper trembled in Diep's hands. She didn't know if it was a warning or a threat, but she knew one thing: the peace they had been building was fragile, and someone out there was waiting to shatter it. That night, as rain tapped against the roof, she sat by the window, watching the shadows stretch across the garden. Somewhere in those shadows, questions lingered. Was Min truly a friend, or something else entirely? And was James hiding more than he had told her? The land felt different now. Still beautiful, still full of promise, but also holding secrets that neither of them could yet see. Too Diep's story teaches us that starting over is never just about changing a place. It's about changing the heart. She left behind a past filled with pain, betrayal, and uncertainty, thinking that a new land would erase old wounds. But she learned that the past has a way of following us, not to destroy us, but to test how deeply we are willing to protect the life we are building. Through the quiet days on her farm, and the storms that came with unexpected visitors, Too Diep discovered that trust is both fragile and precious. James's presence reminded her that love can be a source of strength, but it also requires courage, the courage to face secrets, to forgive, and to stand together when the world turns against you. Her life in the hills showed that happiness is not given. It is built, piece by piece, through hard work, patience, and resilience. And perhaps the most important lesson of all is this: safety is not the absence of danger, but the determination to keep going despite it. True peace comes not when the past disappears, but when we decide that the future we're creating matters more than the pain we've endured. It also became clear to Diep that people are not always what they seem. A warm smile can hide silent ambitions, and kindness can sometimes be the mask of hidden motives. Yet this did not make her bitter. Instead, it taught her to look deeper, to listen not only to words, but to the silences between them. She learned that love, no matter how strong, must be built on honesty. Without truth, even the most beautiful relationship can become fragile. James showed her loyalty and protection, but she also realized that love is not only about being shielded from pain, it is about walking into the storm together with open eyes and open hearts. Her journey in the new land reminded her that strength is often born in quiet moments, in planting seeds, in tending the soil, in believing that something will grow even when the earth seems barren. And when fear came knocking, she discovered that courage does not always roar. Sometimes, it is simply the choice to wake up the next day and keep building. In the end, Diep understood that the greatest gift she could give herself was not escape from her past, but the power to rise above it, and in doing so, she found that new happiness is not a place you find, it is a life you create, day by day, choice by choice,